One of the topics that we've been talking about a lot here in the newsroom is how companies make money from AI. And I want to get your take on how you view this issue on the ground and how you're seeing customers grapple with that issue. Because from our view, there's a lot of revenue, earnings are harder to come by, the costs are pretty high. How are you thinking about that issue?
Yeah, look, I think that it all comes back to understanding ROI. And I'll give you a couple externalities that are throwing off the ROI concept. I'll start with that. When you're doing an AI solution, using agentic especially, you have to think about, are you trying to remove costs from your business, or are you trying to improve your revenue, your top line growth? Is this product driven? Is this adding new functions and features that people are going to pay for and buy? And we saw a lot of pain with software companies in the early days of generative AI, where we often refer to them as ISVs, but the software companies that sell various products to customers, they're like, I know my customers will like this thing. I'm going to build it. And they didn't necessarily think about how they're going to monetize it. Are they going to charge for a new SKU, a new product feature, or is it going to improve customer retention? And so not doing that upfront thinking sort of broke the ROI model. The second piece would be communicate that with your finance partners and teams. Is this revenue driving? Is it cost eliminating? When you have those metrics and measures, it becomes much easier to make that decision. The last piece, and this is probably the one you're going to want to unpack, is, we talked on a prior show about inference and inference costs, and we've talked about all those pieces, the aspect of running AI. We see inference costs dropping by 90% over the next year or two. And so I know that's been a hotly debated concept, but when we look at inference costs coming down, the amount of return you need to make something profitable changes radically. So lots of use cases are getting unblocked as you bring costs down.
How do you see those inference costs coming down? What are the inputs into that? Because as you correctly pointed out, we in our newsroom, we've written stories about how the costs of not just the chips, but the models, right? I mean, the costs were coming down. They've kind of plateaued based on the data that we're seeing. I'm curious how you see that shaking out over the next year or two to bring those costs down.
Let's talk about a couple elements. So when you think about AI today, and we often talk in the public about AI as a big, broad thing, but there are many elements within it. One element of AI is actually building all these complex models. All the frontier model providers are putting lots of effort along with startups in building the next great model, tuning models, et cetera. And honestly, a lot of the AI consumption from a chip perspective, from a compute perspective, is driven toward training and tuning those models versus actually using them. And that's the change that we're seeing right now. The consumption is shifting to usage. And usage is what we largely call inference. So a lot of the reporting that's been done to date just looks at that broader AI landscape and says, hey, chips are getting bigger. They're getting more expensive. We're seeing higher parameter models. Models are increasing in price. Maybe even tokens cost more this month than last month. But if you look at what's changed in the underlying footprint, we're seeing more and more diverse types of chips. You and I have talked about purpose-built infrastructure, chips designed for AI in different shapes and sizes. You're also seeing many different types of models. So at Amazon, we have our own Nova Micro model. It's a very small model used for specific use cases. It's text only. In the rise of agentic, we're seeing these smaller models get used for simpler tasks. And that drives average cost down. And so one of the things you can look at, you asked me what the elements that make it up are you just using the single biggest chip, or are you using different sizes of chips for different workloads? Are you just using one general purpose model that can answer any question, or are you using smaller, more specialized models? And agentic really unlocks that. A couple more techniques I can tell you about, but that's sort of the landscape.
Well, no, and this actually relates to the discussion we were having last time on the show about chips, and you basically talked about the routing of the inquiry or the request to using a specific type of chip, maybe not needing the best in class chip just yet, given the pricing, using something that is a little more feasible or appropriate in terms of the request. I am curious, you gave that 1 to 2 year timeline. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing customers grapple with now then as they sort of work towards hitting that goal in the future?
I'm going to harken back to a conversation we had many months ago on chief AI officers and people things and so on. One big challenge is our mental model towards software development and product building is really changing. You've heard about agile methodologies and other things, but typically you ask permission to build something, you build it, you get it out there and you iterate on it for a while, and it survives for years, maybe many years. What we're seeing happen now with AI that's been really hard is you go build a use case, you're like, oh, this thing's really expensive.
Right.
But if you iterate on it and it gets 90% cheaper in a month or 2 or 3, that really changes the economics. And if it scales up and goes from being used by like 10 users to a million, that also really changes the economics and revenue flow. So I think actually the human side has been hard, this rapid state of pace and of change.
Right.
And the willingness to say, hey, this thing's not working. I'm going to fail fast and drop it and move to the next project. And that could be a cost efficiency project or a new product, right? Could be either side of the equation. And combine that with the challenge around, but I don't want to give up before I've iterated a little bit. Like, how do I find that tension?
And so on the human side, this is kind of interesting because one thing we haven't talked about yet is the spate of acquisitions that
Mhm.
have been sort of becoming more frequent in the AI sector. And these are acquisitions of public companies buying startups. These are public companies buying other public companies as well in some cases. I'm curious, the human side of that is interesting because there's certainly the talent component. But with respect to the technology, how do you see your customers dealing with the question around, is it more appropriate to build or is it more appropriate to buy?
Yeah.
Because again, you're bringing in 100, 200 employees, some of whom are very technical as well. And the human side of this is the teams have to work together too. They got to figure that part out.
I think it's a constant question, especially from enterprises and mid-market companies to me, which is, hey, I have all these vendors. I have a HR product software vendor. I have an ERP vendor. I have a CRM vendor. Do I inherit their AI solutions and features or do I build my own? And the tension is that building your own has never been easier. Like with AI-driven software tools, you can build really fast. But the mental model I asked them to think about is probably three things. Does the thing that you're building bring unique value for your customers? Or is it relatively undifferentiated? Because if it's relatively undifferentiated, you probably don't want to use that limited talent pool to build it. You want to buy it from a vendor, from a partner. You want a friend to help you with it, however. Is your organization ready? Like if you haven't worked much with AI, I just told you about this concept of failing fast and moving quickly and being able
Mhm.
to cost optimize and use different models. If you're not ready, then you might end up costing yourself a lot more time and effort than buying. And really, the most successful companies right now are doing both. They're buying some of these common sort of shared horizontal use cases and building the things that are distinct, especially when they can use their data, because data is the differentiator. You just don't want to be the same as every company down the street from you.
Right. Great. Well, Shawn, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for coming on and engaging conversation. And I look forward to having you back again on soon.